Waitress speaks with deaf elderly woman in sign language. And the restaurant owner freezes. Elizabeth Taylor never imagined that a simple gesture would change everything. The owner of Skyline Restaurant had built her empire with her own hands, but at that moment, standing in the middle of the main dining room, she felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. That's when she saw the new waitress, that blonde girl in the blue uniform, start making hand signs to the customer at table 7. They weren't ordinary signs, they were those signs, the secret signs, the signs that only 3 people in the whole world knew, or at least that's what Elizabeth believed until 5 seconds ago. "Do you need anything else, ma'am?" The receptionist's voice snapped Elizabeth out of her trance for a moment. She didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the scene unfolding at the table by the window. The elderly customer in the yellow suit smiled while moving her hands precisely, and the waitress responded with the same fluency. But that wasn't what made Elizabeth's heart beat irregularly. It was that specific sign the girl had just made, the blue butterfly sign. Elizabeth felt her legs weaken. She had to lean against the wall. "Mrs. Taylor, are you all right?" insisted the receptionist, this time concerned. "I am," she lied, trying to regain control. "I just need a minute." But it wasn't true. Elizabeth was not all right. That sign, that damn sign the girl had just made, was impossible. Absolutely impossible. She and her sister had invented it when they were children, a secret code that only the 2 of them knew. A code born from the need to communicate when the whole world turned its back on them. The waitress walked away from the table with a polite smile, jotting something down on her notepad. Elizabeth watched her walk toward the service counter. She was a pretty girl, probably in her early 20s, with braided blonde hair and light eyes that shone even under the restaurant's artificial light. She had started working there just 3 weeks ago, coming from a small town in the countryside. Elizabeth forced her legs to move. She needed to find out. She needed to understand. She crossed the dining room, trying to appear casual, but her breathing was rapid. The elderly woman in the yellow suit was fiddling with the menu, waiting for her order, completely unaware of the earthquake she had caused just by accepting service from that waitress. When Elizabeth got close enough, she saw the woman's features more clearly. Perfectly styled white hair, a silver brooch on her suit lapel, wrinkled but steady hands. There was something familiar about that face, but Elizabeth couldn't identify what. "Good afternoon." Elizabeth approached the table, her voice coming out more shaky than she would have liked. "May I ask if everything is all right with the service?" The elderly woman looked up and smiled, a kind smile, but one that didn't fully reach her brown eyes that seemed to carry decades of untold stories. The woman made a gesture with her hands, a simple confirmation gesture in standard sign language. Elizabeth almost sighed with relief. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe the resemblance to the secret signs was just a coincidence. After all, more than 40 years had passed. Her memory might be distorting things. But then the elderly woman made another sign, and Elizabeth froze again. It wasn't common sign language. It was the sign for thank you that she and her sister used. The sign that involved touching the heart with the right hand and then making a circular motion with the index and middle fingers. A sign that didn't exist in any ASL dictionary. A sign that belonged only to them. Elizabeth felt tears burning in her eyes. It couldn't be. It couldn't. "Excuse me," she murmured, taking a step back. "I'll check on your order in the kitchen." She turned and walked as fast as she could without seeming desperate. I needed to get to her office. She needed to breathe. She needed to understand what was happening. The office was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a discreet staircase at the back of the restaurant. Elizabeth Taylor climbed the steps, holding tightly to the railing, each step a battle against the dizziness that threatened to knock her down. When she finally closed the door behind her, she collapsed into the leather chair behind the desk. Her hands were shaking so much that it took 3 attempts to open the lower right drawer. There, hidden under tax documents and old contracts, was an envelope yellowed with time. Elizabeth Taylor carefully removed it, as if it would disintegrate at the touch. Inside were photographs she hadn't looked at in years, but had never been able to throw away. In the first, 2 girls smiled at the camera. One was about 8 years old, the other just 5. The younger one was making a sign with her hands. The blue butterfly sign. Elizabeth Taylor ran her finger over the faded image. That was her sister, Rachel. The little sister who had dark hair and bright eyes, who laughed without making a sound and communicated with her hands because she was born deaf. The sister her parents rejected. The sister who was taken from her by a cold, bureaucratic court decision. A knock on the door made Elizabeth Taylor quickly put away the photos. "Come in," she said, trying to control her voice. It was Michael, her son, a 35-year-old man, dark hair combed back, impeccable suit. He was the operations manager of the restaurant, handling everything Elizabeth Taylor no longer had the patience to deal with. "Mom, you're pale," he said, closing the door behind him. "What happened?" Elizabeth Taylor hesitated. Michael knew about Rachel's existence but didn't know the details. He didn't know about the secret language, the invented signs, how two sisters tried to build their own world before insensitive adults separated them. "The customer at table 7, Elizabeth Taylor began, choosing her words carefully. "The lady in the yellow suit. Do you know her?" "Mrs. Wilson. She comes here every month," Michael replied, sitting in the chair on the other side of the desk. "She always orders the same dish, always leaves a generous tip. Why?" "Catherine." The name meant nothing to Elizabeth Taylor, but those signs said everything. "And the new waitress? The blonde one?" "Emma?" Michael tilted his head, confused by the questions. "She's excellent. The customers love her. She came from Cincinnati, recommended by the employment agency. Why are you asking this?" Elizabeth Taylor didn't answer immediately. Her brain was working fast, connecting dots that perhaps shouldn't be connected. A waitress who knew secret signs, an elderly customer who responded to the same signs, and her there in the middle with 40 years of searching on her back. "Bring me her hiring file," Elizabeth Taylor asked, and discreetly, without her noticing, try to find out more about Mrs. Wilson, where she lives, how long she's been coming to the restaurant, any information you can get. Michael stared at her for a long moment, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but he knew his mother well enough to know when to insist and when to obey. "Okay," he stood up, "but if there's anything wrong, you need to tell me." When she was alone again, Elizabeth Taylor looked at the photographs again. In the second photo in the envelope, Rachel appeared a little older, perhaps 7 years old. She was sitting on the floor of the living room in the house where they lived before everything fell apart. She was holding a notebook where she drew the blue butterflies she loved so much. Elizabeth Taylor remembered that day. She remembered promising that she would always protect her sister. She remembered failing. The phone on the desk rang, pulling Elizabeth Taylor from her memories. It was the reception desk saying there was a supplier waiting. Elizabeth Taylor dismissed the call and returned to the office window that overlooked the main dining room. From there she could see table 7. Mrs. Wilson remained seated, now accompanied by a man in a suit who must have arrived while Elizabeth was in the office. They were talking, and occasionally the elderly woman made hand signs. Emma, the waitress, approached the table carrying a tray. She served the dishes efficiently, smiled at the customers, and then it happened again. Mrs. Wilson made a sign and Emma responded. Even from a distance, even without seeing clearly, Elizabeth recognized the movement. It was the sign for beautiful, another code that she and Rachel had created. It involved touching one's own cheek and then making a movement that resembled a flower opening. Elizabeth gripped the window ledge. The room began to spin. That couldn't be a coincidence. It just couldn't. The door opened again, and Michael entered carrying a folder. "Emma's file," he said, placing it on the table. "And I got some information about Mrs. Wilson. She's a retired teacher. She worked for decades at a special school for children with educational needs. She lives alone in an apartment in the Upper East Side neighborhood, teacher at a special school." The words echoed in Elizabeth's mind. Rachel had been placed in such a school after she was taken from the family. The maternal grandparents, who won custody, didn't know how to handle a deaf child and sent her to an institution. "Michael," Elizabeth said slowly, "I need you to do something for me." I need you to find out which school Mrs. Wilson worked at. The names of the schools, the dates, everything. Mom, you're scaring me. Please. She looked at him, and perhaps something in her expression conveyed the urgency. Just do this for me. Michael sighed but nodded before leaving again. Elizabeth opened the folder with Emma's documents. Full name, Emma Parker Wilson, 23 years old, born in Cincinnati, had previous experience at other restaurants in the area. Impeccable references. But it was in the personal information section that Elizabeth found what made her heart almost stop. In emergency contact person it said, Grandmother Catherine Wilson. Catherine, the same name as the customer at table 7. Elizabeth's hands trembled so much that the paper almost fell. It couldn't be. But it was there in black and white. The waitress who knew the secret signs had a grandmother named Catherine, the same Catherine who frequented the restaurant and also knew those signs. Elizabeth needed air. She stood up abruptly and left the office, going down the stairs in quick steps. She crossed the kitchen, ignoring the greetings of the employees, and went out the back door that led to a small courtyard. There, leaning against the brick wall, she finally allowed the tears to fall. 40 years, 40 damn years looking for her sister, hiring private detectives, following leads that went nowhere, opening that restaurant in that specific neighborhood because it had been the last place where Rachel was seen before disappearing from the adoption system. 40 years of guilt and remorse for not being able to stop them from taking her. 40 years believing she would never find her. And now, suddenly, those signs, that impossible connection. Mrs. Taylor? A young voice snapped her out of her trance. Elizabeth quickly wiped away the tears and turned around. It was Emma, the waitress. The girl looked worried, with her notepad still in hand. Sorry to bother you, Emma said hesitantly, but Michael said you weren't feeling well and I saw you coming out here. Do you want me to call someone? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Elizabeth studied her for a moment. Up close, she could see details she hadn't noticed before. The girl had a small birthmark on her neck, just below her left ear. A crescent moon-shaped mark. Exactly like the one Rachel had. Exactly like the one in that third photograph Elizabeth kept in the yellowed envelope. Emma, Elizabeth heard her own voice come out hoarse. Where did you learn sign language? The question seemed to catch the girl by surprise. From my grandmother, she replied, a gentle smile appearing on her face. She was a special education teacher her whole life. She taught me since I was little. She said it was important to know how to communicate with all people, no matter how. Your grandmother, Elizabeth repeated. Catherine Wilson? You know her? Emma seemed genuinely surprised. She's at the restaurant right now, table 7. I know, Emma smiled more broadly. She's the one who recommended me to work here, said it was a good place, that the owner was a serious and fair person, that I would be treated well. Elizabeth felt a tightening in her chest. Catherine knew. Somehow that woman knew who Elizabeth was and had sent her granddaughter to work there. But why? What did she want? Emma, I need you to be honest with me. Elizabeth took a step toward the waitress. The signs you used with your grandmother today, they weren't common ASL, were they? The girl hesitated, something changing in her expression. A shadow of distrust or perhaps caution. No, she admitted slowly. They're special signs. My grandmother taught me, said she learned them from a very special friend a long time ago. A friend who invented her own language because she wanted to communicate in a way that only she and her sister understood. The world stopped. Elizabeth had to lean against the wall again. The sister, she whispered. Did your grandmother mention this friend's sister? Not much, Emma replied, now clearly confused by the questions. Just said the sister looked for her friend for a long time, that she never gave up, that she had a beautiful restaurant where they served food with love. Tears returned to Elizabeth's eyes. They weren't tears of sadness this time, but of something she hadn't felt in decades, hope. Emma, I need to speak with your grandmother, Elizabeth said, her voice firm despite the emotions choking her. Now it's important. The girl nodded, still confused, but sensing the seriousness of the moment. She's still at the table. I can take you there, if you want." Elizabeth took a deep breath, trying to prepare herself for what was coming next. 40 years of preparation, actually, though she hadn't known it until that moment. They went back inside the restaurant. Elizabeth followed Emma through the kitchen, the service corridor, to the main dining room. Each step felt heavier than the last. Customers chatted animatedly at their tables, unaware of the drama unfolding. Waiters came and went with trays. The sound of cutlery against plates created a symphony of normality that contrasted violently with the whirlwind inside Elizabeth. When they reached table 7, Catherine looked up, and in that moment, when their eyes met, Elizabeth saw. She saw recognition. She saw decades of kept secrets. She saw truths that needed to be spoken. Catherine made a sign with her hands, a slow, deliberate sign, the blue butterfly sign. Elizabeth felt her legs weaken, but she remained standing. With trembling hands, she responded. She made the thank you sign, in the secret way. The way only she and Rachel knew. The elderly woman closed her eyes for a moment, a single tear running down her wrinkled face. When she opened them again, she made another sign. One Elizabeth hadn't seen in 40 years. The sign for sister. A sign that involved intertwining pinkies and touching the heart. "You knew her," Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty. "You knew Rachel." Catherine nodded and gestured for Elizabeth to sit down. The restaurant owner obeyed, her legs finally giving way. Emma pulled a chair from another table, feeling she was witnessing something important, even without fully understanding what. The man who was with Catherine, and whom Elizabeth had completely forgotten, stood up. "I'll give you some time to talk," he said, his voice gentle. "It seems you need privacy." When they were alone, Catherine took a small notebook from her bag. She opened it to a blank page and began writing with a steady hand, despite her age. Then she turned the notebook toward Elizabeth. "I was Rachel's teacher when she was 7 years old, at Hope Academy in Chicago." Elizabeth read the words 3 times before she could process them. Hope Academy. She knew that name. She had tried to visit Rachel there countless times when she was a teenager, but the girl's grandparents had obtained a court order preventing any contact. Catherine continued writing. "Rachel was a special girl, brilliant, full of life despite everything she had been through. She taught me the secret signs, said they were hers and her older sister's, that one day the sister would come back for her." Tears were now streaming freely down Elizabeth's face. She didn't care if other customers might see. She didn't care about anything except those handwritten words in an old notebook. "She remembered me," Elizabeth whispered. "After everything, she still remembered." Catherine nodded vigorously and kept writing. "She never forgot, spoke of you every day. Elizabeth, the brave sister who promised to protect her. She kept the secret signs as a way to keep you alive in her heart." "Where is she?" Elizabeth grabbed Catherine's hand across the table. "Please tell me she's okay. Tell me I can see her." Catherine hesitated. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen again. Emma, who had been silently observing until then, leaned forward, also anxious for the answer. "Rachel became my adopted daughter when she was 9. Her grandparents abandoned her at the school, said they couldn't handle her anymore. I took her in. We formed a strong bond. She grew up, studied, graduated, had a good life." Elizabeth felt a mix of relief and pain. Relief because Rachel had found someone who cared for her. Pain because it should have been her. It should have been the older sister. "And now," Elizabeth pressed, "where is she now?" Catherine looked at Emma before continuing to write. Her hands trembled more than before. "Rachel had a daughter when she was 24. A beautiful girl who was born with the same blue eyes and the same moon-shaped mark on her neck that she had. Rachel taught her daughter the secret signs, said that one day they would be important, that one day they would lead the child to the person she loved most in the world but could never find." Elizabeth stopped breathing. Her eyes went from the notebook to Emma and back. The waitress also seemed to be connecting the dots, her expression changing from confusion to shock. "No," Emma whispered. "It can't be." Catherine wrote one more line. A single line that would change everything. "Emma is Rachel's granddaughter. Your great-niece, Elizabeth." The silence that followed was absolute. Elizabeth looked at the young woman sitting beside her, truly seeing her for the first time. The blue eyes, the moon-shaped mark, the facial features she now realized were so similar to Rachel's in the photographs. How had she not seen it before? "My mother," Emma began, her voice trembling. "My mother never spoke about her biological family, only said she was adopted by Grandma Catherine when she was a child, that before that she had lived at a school. I always knew she was deaf, but I never imagined—" "Rachel is your mother," Elizabeth finished, still trying to process it. "My sister is your mother." Emma nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Catherine wrote again, "Rachel asked me to keep my distance from you. Not because she didn't want the reunion, but because she was afraid. Afraid that your biological family could cause problems. Your parents never wanted her. They made sure to make that clear. Rachel was afraid they would try to take Emma from her too. The guilt Elizabeth had carried for decades intensified. Her parents. Those monsters she called parents, who rejected a daughter for being different, who destroyed 2 childhoods with their intolerance. They've been lost for years," Elizabeth said, her voice hard. "I never forgave what they did to Rachel. I never forgave myself for not being able to stop them." "You were only 8 years old," Emma said softly. "What could a child have done?" "More than I did," Elizabeth replied bitterly. Catherine placed her hand over Elizabeth's in a comforting gesture. Then she wrote another message. "Rachel never blamed you. She knew you tried. I saw the letters you sent to the school, hundreds of them. The principal never delivered any on the orders of Rachel's grandparents. But I kept them all. They're in a box at my house. Rachel read them when she got older. She cried for days." Elizabeth covered her face with her hands. All those letters, all that love poured onto paper that she thought had been discarded. Rachel had read them. Rachel knew. "Why now?" Elizabeth asked, raising her eyes to Catherine. "Why, after 40 years, do you show up here? Why send Emma to work at my restaurant?" Catherine didn't write immediately. She looked out the restaurant window at the sea stretching into the distance. When she started writing again, her hands were visibly shaking. "Because Rachel is sick, and before it all ends, she needs to see you." The words hit Elizabeth like a punch. Sick. Rachel was sick. What's wrong with her? The question came out desperate. Catherine wrote slowly, as if each word caused pain. "Her kidneys are failing. She needs an urgent transplant. We've tried everyone in the family. None of us are a match. Emma isn't. I'm not. But a sister. A sister has a better chance of being compatible." The truth fell on Elizabeth like an avalanche. Catherine hadn't come looking for her out of nostalgia or a desire for a family reunion. She had come out of necessity, out of desperation. Rachel was dying and needed a miracle. "You want me to be tested?" Elizabeth said, more a statement than a question. Catherine nodded, new tear tracks marking her wrinkled face. "I know it's a lot to ask. I know that after all these years you owe Rachel nothing. But she is your sister, and I would do anything to save her. Anything." Elizabeth looked at Emma, who was watching her with hope and fear mixed in her expression. Then she looked at Catherine, at that woman who had been more of a mother to Rachel than her own biological mother ever was. "I need to see her first," Elizabeth said. "I need to see my sister." Catherine smiled through the tears and nodded vigorously. She wrote an address in the notepad and tore out the page, handing it to Elizabeth. "She's at General Hospital, Nephrology Wing, room 312. You can visit her whenever you want. I told the staff that her sister might show up. They'll let you in." Elizabeth took the paper with trembling hands. General Hospital, just a few miles away. Rachel had been so close all this time. "Can I go with you?" Emma asked timidly. "I want to be there when you meet. My mother always wanted that. Always." Elizabeth looked at the niece she didn't know she had, at that girl who carried her sister's genes, the same secret signs, the same moon-shaped mark on her neck. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you should be there." Michael appeared at that moment, approaching the table with a worried expression. "Mom, what's going on? The waiters said you've been crying here for half an hour." Elizabeth stood up, wiping away her tears. "Son, I need you to take care of the restaurant for the rest of the day," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Maybe for the next few days. I have something important to take care of." "But, Mom—" "Please, Michael, trust me." He studied her for a long moment, then looked at Catherine and Emma. Something in his eyes changed, as if he understood this was bigger than all of them. "All right," he agreed. "Go do what you need to do. I'll take care of everything here." Elizabeth kissed her son's forehead, then turned to Catherine and Emma. "Let's go," she said. "Right now." The drive to the hospital was made in silence. Elizabeth drove her car, with Emma in the passenger seat and Catherine in the back. No one spoke, but the air was heavy with expectation and fear. Elizabeth gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. 40 years. 40 years until this moment. When they arrived at the hospital, Catherine guided them through the maze-like corridors. The smell of disinfectant and sickness hung in the air. Patients in wheelchairs were being pushed by companions. Doctors and nurses rushed past. It was a world of contained suffering between white walls. Room 312 was at the end of a long hallway. Elizabeth stopped in front of the door, her heart beating so fast she thought it would explode. Emma touched her arm in a gesture of encouragement. "She's waiting for you," the girl said softly. "She always has been." Elizabeth took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was small, with a hospital bed in the center, machines around it, a window overlooking the city, and in the bed, connected to tubes and monitors, was Rachel. Elizabeth recognized her immediately, despite the 40 years that had passed. Her face was thinner, marked by illness. Her hair, once black and shiny, was now gray and thin, but the eyes were the same, those dark eyes that shone with intelligence and kindness. Rachel was awake. Her eyes widened when Elizabeth entered, and an expression of pure shock and joy took over her face. She tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Elizabeth crossed the room in 3 quick steps. She fell to her knees beside the bed and took her sister's hand. It was cold, thin, so different from the chubby hand she remembered from their childhood. "Rachel," she whispered, knowing her sister couldn't hear her, but needing to say it anyway. "Rachel, my little sister." Rachel began to make signs with her free hand, quick, desperate signs, the secret signs mixed with ASL. Elizabeth tried to follow, but she was rusty, having forgotten some meanings. Emma stepped closer and began to translate. "She's saying she never stopped thinking about you," Emma spoke, her voice choked. "That every night before sleeping, she made the blue butterfly sign and wished you could see it. That she tried to look for you when she grew up, but you had changed your name after getting married. That when she heard about the Skyline restaurant and found out the owner was named Elizabeth Taylor, she investigated and saw your picture in the newspaper. That she recognized her sister immediately." Elizabeth was sobbing now, not caring that she was making a scene. "Why didn't you come to me?" she asked, as Emma translated. "Why did you wait so long?" Rachel made more signs, slower this time. Tears streamed down her face. "She says she was afraid," Emma translated. "Afraid that you had moved on, that you had a new family and didn't want to be reminded of the painful past, that she was afraid she wasn't good enough for you. She was the rejected sister, the defective sister." "No," Elizabeth said vehemently, making the signs along with the words to make sure Rachel would understand. "You were never defective. Never. Our parents were the monsters, not you. Never you." Rachel smiled through the tears and made the sign for "I love you." Not the standard ASL sign, but the secret sign they had created. It involved touching her own heart and then touching the other person's heart. Elizabeth placed Rachel's hand over her own heart. "I've always loved you," she said. "I never stopped, not for a single day." Catherine and Emma watched from the doorway, their own tears falling silently. It was too intimate a moment to interrupt, a moment that had waited 40 years to happen. "I need to speak with the doctors," Elizabeth finally said, wiping her face. "I need to know about the transplant, about what needs to be done." Rachel began signing frantically, but Elizabeth gently interrupted her. "No," she said, signing along. "I won't hear any arguments. You're my sister. I'm going to get tested, and if I'm compatible, you'll have my kidney. No discussion." Rachel stared at her for a long moment, then pulled Elizabeth closer and hugged her. It was a weak hug due to the illness, but it was filled with 40 years of longing. They stayed like that for long minutes, two sisters finally reunited after a lifetime apart. None of their secret signs were necessary now. Love spoke louder than any language. When they finally separated, Elizabeth stood up and went to the door where Catherine and Emma waited. "Thank you," she said to the elderly woman. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't. Thank you for being the mother she deserved." Catherine shook her head and hugged Elizabeth. It was a hug of mutual understanding between two women who loved Rachel more than life itself. "I'm going to speak with the medical team," Elizabeth said, pulling away. "Emma, will you stay with your mother? I don't want her to be alone right now." "Of course," the girl replied, going to sit by the bedside. Elizabeth left the room and looked for the nurse's station. A woman in a white coat greeted her. "I'm the sister of the patient in room 312, Elizabeth explained. "Rachel Wilson. I'd like to know about the possibility of kidney donation." The nurse checked the system. "You need to speak with Dr. Richard Brown. He's the nephrologist in charge. I'll see if he can see you now." 15 minutes later, Elizabeth was sitting in a small room facing a man in his early 40s with graying hair and a serious but kind expression. "Mrs. Taylor, I understand you wish to be tested as a possible donor," the doctor began. "I need to explain some details. Rachel is in stage 4 kidney disease. Her kidneys are functioning at less than 20% capacity. She urgently needs a transplant. The longer we wait, the greater the risks." "When can I get tested?" "Today, if you're willing. But you need to understand that being sisters doesn't guarantee compatibility. There are several factors involved. Blood type, tissue compatibility, antibodies. It's a complex process." "I understand," Elizabeth said, "but I have to try." "There are also risks for you," the doctor continued. "Donating a kidney isn't a simple procedure. There are risks of surgical complications, long-term risks to your own kidney health. You'll need to change some habits, have regular medical follow-ups for the rest of your life." "That's fine," Elizabeth said without hesitation. "She's my sister. I'd do anything for her." The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's begin. I'll order the initial tests. It may take a few days to get all the results." The following days were a haze of tests and waiting. Elizabeth underwent blood tests, urine tests, CT scans, psychological evaluations. Each test was torture with anxiety. What if she wasn't compatible? What if Rachel died waiting? During this time, Elizabeth visited the hospital every day. She sat by Rachel's bedside and they talked through ASL. They talked about everything that had happened during their 40 years apart. Elizabeth told her about building the restaurant from scratch, about her marriage that didn't work out, about Michael and how he was a good son. Rachel shared about her life with Catherine, about how she graduated in graphic design, about when she met Emma's father in a deaf community, about what it was like being a mother. Emma was always present too. Elizabeth began getting to know her niece better. She discovered that she loved to read, that she had a special talent for drawing, that she dreamed of opening her own clothing store one day. With each conversation, Elizabeth saw more of Rachel in the girl, not just in physical features, but in kindness, in quiet determination, in how she cared for everyone around her. Michael appeared on the 3rd day. Elizabeth had told him about Rachel, about the whole story. He was shocked, but supportive. "Why did you never tell me about her?" he asked as they walked down the hospital corridor. "Because it hurts," Elizabeth admitted. "Because every time I talked about Rachel, I had to relive the day they took her away, the day I failed as a sister. Mom, you didn't fail, you were a child. But I felt guilty anyway." Michael hugged his mother. "Well, now you have the chance to make up for all that lost time." On the 5th day, Dr. Brown called Elizabeth into his office. She entered with her heart in her throat. "I have good news," he said, and Elizabeth felt her legs almost give way with relief. "You're compatible. It's not a perfect match, but it's good enough. We can proceed with the transplant." Elizabeth covered her face with her hands and cried. She cried with relief, with joy, with gratitude. She could save Rachel. She could do what she couldn't do 40 years ago. She could protect her sister. "When can we do the surgery?" "I need to explain the procedures," the doctor said. "The surgery is complex. It will take several hours. You'll need at least 2 weeks of recovery, possibly more. And, as I mentioned, you'll have to change your lifestyle permanently." "I don't mind," Elizabeth said. "When?" "We can schedule it for 1 week from now. That gives us time to prepare both of you properly and gather the necessary team." 1 week. 7 days until she could give Rachel a second chance at life. When Elizabeth returned to the room and shared the news through Emma, Rachel began to cry. She tried to argue, tried to say she couldn't accept such a sacrifice, but Elizabeth was firm. "You're my sister," she said, making the signs as she spoke. 40 years ago, I promised I would protect you. I failed then. I won't fail now." Rachel held Elizabeth's hands and brought them to her own heart, making the sign for "I love you" repeatedly. Catherine appeared in the afternoon bringing homemade food, something she did every day despite Elizabeth insisting she didn't need to. "You shouldn't worry so much about me," Elizabeth said, while accepting the meal container. Catherine took out her notepad and wrote, "You're going to save my daughter. It's the least I can do." "Rachel is your daughter in heart," Elizabeth said gently, "but she's also my sister by blood. That doesn't make us rivals. It makes us allies. We both love her. We both want what's best for her." Catherine smiled and wrote another note. "You're a good woman, Elizabeth. Rachel was right about you." What did she say? That her older sister was brave, that she was strong, that she would never give up on her, no matter how much time passed. Elizabeth felt tears forming again. It seemed like all she'd been doing lately was crying. The days until the surgery passed both too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Elizabeth prepared everything at the restaurant, leaving detailed instructions for Michael. He supported her completely, saying the business could wait, that family came first. The night before the surgery, Elizabeth had trouble sleeping. It wasn't fear about the procedure itself, but anxiety about what would come after. What if something went wrong? What if her kidney didn't work in Rachel's body? What if she had waited 40 years only to fail again? She arrived at the hospital at 6 in the morning. Rachel was already there being prepped in a room next door. They met briefly before being taken to the operating room. "See you on the other side," Elizabeth said through signs, forcing a confident smile she didn't fully feel. Rachel held her hand and made the blue butterfly sign. That sign that had started it all, that had connected them across decades of separation, that now led them to the most important moment of their lives. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Emma, Catherine, and Michael waited together in the waiting room, united by anxiety and hope. When Dr. Brown finally appeared, still in his surgical scrubs, they all jumped to their feet. "The surgery was a success," he announced, and the relief that swept the room was palpable. "Elizabeth's kidney is working perfectly. Rachel responded well to the procedure. Both are in recovery now. The next 48 hours are critical, but I'm optimistic." Emma hugged Catherine and they both cried. Michael shook the doctor's hand repeatedly, thanking him. It was a moment of pure joy after days of tension. Elizabeth woke hours later in the recovery room. Everything hurt, but she didn't mind. The first thing she asked when she was conscious enough was about Rachel. "She's fine," the nurse assured her. "The kidney is working. She's in the next room, still sleeping." "Can I see her?" Elizabeth tried to sit up, but the pain stopped her. "Not yet. You need to rest. Tomorrow, perhaps." But Elizabeth didn't have to wait that long. Rachel woke first and, ignoring the doctor's protests, insisted on being taken to Elizabeth's room in a wheelchair. When Elizabeth opened her eyes again, Rachel was there beside her bed. Her eyes were bright, more alive than Elizabeth had seen since their reunion. The kidney was working. Rachel was getting better. Rachel made the thank you sign repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Elizabeth reached out her hand and Rachel held it. "We're sisters," Elizabeth signed with her free hand, ignoring the pain. "That's what sisters are for." In the following days they recovered side by side. The doctors moved their beds into the same room when they realized the sisters were calmer together. There, surrounded by the family that was rebuilding itself, Elizabeth and Rachel began planning the future. "I'm going to change the restaurant," Elizabeth said through Emma as her niece translated. "I'll turn it into an inclusive place, with menus in ASL, staff trained in sign language, a place where everyone is welcome no matter how they communicate." Rachel applauded the idea, her eyes shining. "And you'll help me with the design," Elizabeth continued. "Emma said you're a graphic designer. I could use your talent. I want the restaurant to be ours, from the two sisters who were separated but never stopped loving each other." Catherine, watching from the chair in the corner, smiled through her tears. Seeing the sisters together, seeing Rachel's health returning each day, seeing the family reuniting after so long, was more than she had dared to hope for. Michael also visited daily, bringing updates from the restaurant and getting to know his newly discovered aunt and cousin better. He grew especially close to Emma, finding they had much in common. They both loved movies, both dreamed of traveling the world, and both had a dry sense of humor that made them laugh for hours. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 2 weeks after the surgery, both Elizabeth and Rachel were discharged. It was a bittersweet moment, leaving the hospital where their lives had become intertwined again, but exciting to think about the future that awaited them. "Come live with me," Elizabeth proposed, while Catherine helped Rachel get dressed. "I have a big house, plenty of space. Emma can come too. We can be a real family." Rachel hesitated, looking at Catherine with concern. The older woman noticed and quickly wrote, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. You need to make up for lost time, but I'll always be here when you need me." That's how Rachel and Emma moved into Elizabeth's house, a spacious mansion on the outskirts of Chicago with a view of the mountains. Michael helped with the move, carrying boxes and furniture, while joking about how the family was suddenly getting so big. The first few months were an adjustment. Rachel needed constant medical monitoring to ensure the transplanted kidney was working properly. Elizabeth was also doing physical therapy to fully recover from her surgeries. But even with the physical difficulties, both were happier than they had been in decades. They spent hours talking through signs, filling in the gaps of 40 years. Rachel told about growing up at Hope Academy, about the friends she made there, about how Catherine had found her crying in the hallway one day and decided that special girl deserved love and protection. Elizabeth told about marrying young, trying to escape her parents' house, about how the marriage didn't work but gave her Michael, about how she opened the restaurant with the last money she had, determined to make something of value with her life. "You succeeded." Rachel signed one evening as they ate dinner together on the porch. "You did something amazing. The Skyline restaurant is wonderful." "But you know what was missing?" Elizabeth replied. "You. You were always missing." It was Rachel who suggested they turn the restaurant into something bigger, not just a place to eat, but a community center, a space where families with deaf members could gather, where children could learn sign language, where inclusion was more than just a nice word. Elizabeth loved the idea immediately. Together with Michael handling the financial and legal aspects, they began planning the renovation. Rachel created a new design for the restaurant, incorporating visual elements that would facilitate communication. Emma, who had shown a talent for fashion, suggested new uniforms for the staff, more practical and elegant. Catherine was invited to all the planning meetings. After all, she had been the bridge that brought the family together again. She offered suggestions based on her experience as a teacher, ideas on how to make the space truly accessible. The renovation took 4 months. During that time, the restaurant was closed. Elizabeth used the opportunity to train the entire staff in basic sign language. Rachel and Catherine conducted the training, teaching not just the signs, but the importance of understanding and respecting the deaf community. Emma showed a natural talent for management. She coordinated suppliers, supervised the renovation, ensured everything was being done according to plan. Michael watched, impressed, seeing in his younger cousin a potential business partner. "She's good at this," he commented to Elizabeth one day as they watched Emma negotiate with a supplier. "She has the right instincts. She's Rachel's daughter," Elizabeth replied with pride, "and Catherine's granddaughter. She has good genes and better upbringing. When the restaurant reopened, it was with a big party. Chicago's deaf community was invited, as well as journalists, influencers, and ordinary people who had heard about the project. The Skyline restaurant was transformed. There were digital screens at every table where customers could place orders in multiple languages, including ASL. The menus had clear photos of each dish and descriptions in large, clear text. The lighting had been adjusted to facilitate lip reading. There was even a special corner for free sign language classes twice a week. The big surprise of the evening came when Elizabeth took Rachel to the makeshift stage set up for the occasion. "I want to introduce you to my sister," Elizabeth said, her words simultaneously translated into ASL by an interpreter. "Rachel Wilson. She's a brilliant graphic designer, a dedicated mother, and the strongest person I know. She's also the co-author of this project. Without her vision and passion, none of this would exist." The hall erupted in applause. Rachel, surprised and moved, waved to everyone. Then she did something no one expected. She began to tell her story through signs, with the interpreter translating. She told about being rejected by her biological family, about growing up in an institution, about Catherine, who saved her and gave her love when no one else wanted her, and about Elizabeth, the sister who never gave up, who searched for 40 years, who literally gave a kidney to save her. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall when she finished. "Sign language," Rachel continued, "is beautiful, it's expressive, it's powerful. But you know what I discovered? The language of love is even stronger. It spans decades of separation. It overcomes prejudice and rejection. It reconnects us when all seems lost." Elizabeth stepped onto the stage and hugged her sister, and then together they made the blue butterfly sign, that secret sign that had been only theirs for so long. But now they explained its meaning to everyone present. It was a sign of hope, of transformation, of beauty emerging from pain. "We want everyone to learn this sign," Elizabeth announced. "We want it to become a symbol of never giving up on the people we love, of always believing that reunion is possible." And so, that night, hundreds of people learned the blue butterfly sign, the sign that two sisters invented when they were children, and that now became a symbol of inclusion, love, and family. In the following months, the Skyline restaurant became more than a successful business. It became a meeting point for the deaf community and an example of true inclusion. Stories began to circulate about families who reunited there, about deaf children who finally had a place where they were treated like everyone else, about hearing people who learned sign language and discovered a whole world they never knew. Rachel officially took on the role of design and accessibility director. She worked side by side with Elizabeth, and the sisters became a formidable team. Where Elizabeth had business instinct, Rachel had artistic sensitivity. Where Elizabeth was bold, Rachel was careful. They complemented each other perfectly. Emma ended up quitting her job as a waitress and took on a more meaningful role at the restaurant. With Elizabeth's support and Michael's guidance, she began developing a line of products related to the restaurant. T-shirts with the blue butterfly sign, mugs with phrases in ASL, educational books about inclusion. The profits were split between the restaurant and projects supporting the deaf community. Michael and Emma became not just cousins, but best friends. He helped her with the business aspects of her projects, and she helped him see the world from a more inclusive and compassionate perspective. It was Emma who convinced him to learn ASL fluently, and it was through this learning that Michael met Jennifer, a deaf teacher who frequented the restaurant regularly. Catherine remained a constant presence in everyone's lives. She came to the restaurant several times a week, no longer as a customer, but as part of the family. Elizabeth insisted on giving her a symbolic share in the business's profits. "How you saved my sister when I couldn't," Elizabeth explained when Catherine tried to refuse. "You raised her, loved her, prepared her for the world. You are as much a part of this family as any of us." It was Catherine who suggested creating a scholarship fund for deaf youth who wanted to study design, culinary arts, or business management. The idea was implemented immediately, with the first class of scholarship recipients starting the following year. One day, 2 years after the reunion, Elizabeth received an unexpected call. It was a lawyer representing her parents' estate. Both had recently passed away, leaving a considerable amount of money and properties. "I don't want anything from them," was Elizabeth's first reaction. Rachel, who was in the room when the call happened, touched her sister's arm. "You may not want it," she signed through Emma, who translated. "But we can use that money to help other children. Children like me who are rejected for having special needs. We can turn the pain they caused us into something positive." And that's exactly what they did. With the inheritance, they created the Blue Butterfly Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of children with hearing disabilities, offering resources, education, and emotional support. The foundation's headquarters was established in one of the inherited properties, completely renovated by Rachel to be fully accessible. The foundation offered several things: free sign language classes for families, counseling for parents dealing with their child's deafness diagnosis, support groups, community events. Rachel and Catherine worked as lead volunteers, using their experiences to help others walking the same path. But not everything was perfect. There were challenges along the way. Rachel's recovery from the transplant had its difficult moments. There were episodes of rejection that required medication adjustments. There were times when Elizabeth woke up in the middle of the night in a panic, fearing something would go wrong, and she would lose her sister again. And there were the memories, the painful recollections that no amount of time could completely erase. Rachel had occasional nightmares about her days in the institution, about feeling rejected and unloved. Elizabeth carried persistent guilt for not being able to prevent the separation, even though she rationally knew she was just a child at the time. They dealt with it together, through individual and family therapy. They learned that healing didn't mean forgetting, but integrating the painful past into a more hopeful present. Emma also had her own issues to process, discovering the truth about her mother's family, understanding the context of rejection and abandonment that Rachel suffered, dealing with anger toward the great-grandparents she never knew but who caused so much suffering. Elizabeth and Rachel helped her through it, constantly reminding her that she was loved, that she was wanted, that she would never be abandoned. Michael faced his own dilemmas. The sudden arrival of an aunt and a cousin changed the family dynamics he had known his whole life. At first he felt jealous of how much attention Elizabeth dedicated to Rachel, but over time, and with honest conversations with his mother, he understood that love wasn't a finite resource. Elizabeth could love Rachel intensely and still love him just as much. In fact, Rachel's presence enriched Michael's life in ways he didn't expect. She taught him about resilience, about finding joy despite adversity, about the strength that comes from vulnerability. He became a better man, more empathetic and understanding for having her in his life. 3 years after the reunion, the Skyline restaurant gained national recognition. A popular television program did a special feature on the establishment and the sisters' story. The segment aired during prime time and touched millions of people. The consequences were unexpected. The restaurant was flooded with reservations. People from all over the country wanted to visit, wanted to meet the sisters, wanted to learn the blue butterfly sign. But more importantly, the program inspired other families. Siblings separated for decades began searching for each other again. Parents who had rejected children with disabilities sought reconciliation. The blue butterfly sign became a movement of family reunification and acceptance. Elizabeth and Rachel were invited to speak at conferences, to share their story in schools, to appear on podcasts and radio shows. They accepted some invitations, always choosing those that could have the greatest positive impact. During one of these talks at a university, a young woman approached Rachel after the presentation. "My sister is deaf," the girl said with Emma translating. "My parents want to send her to an institution. They say they can't handle it. But after hearing your story, I understood that I can't let that happen. I can't abandon my sister like you were abandoned." Rachel hugged the girl and gave her the contact information for the Blue Butterfly Foundation. "We have resources to help your family," she signed. "No one needs to be sent away. No one needs to feel unloved. I learned that the hard way, but now I use that experience to help others." Moments like this reminded Elizabeth and Rachel why everything they had been through was worth it. Every scar, every year of separation, every tear she'd had led to this moment when they could make a difference in other people's lives. Catherine continued to be the silent but essential pillar of the family. Now in her 70s, she began to slow down a bit. She could no longer work full-time at the foundation, but she continued mentoring and advising. It was during one of these quiet afternoons on Elizabeth's porch, with Rachel drawing, Emma working on her laptop, and Michael reviewing documents, that Catherine took out her notebook and wrote something that she read aloud through Emma. "I wanted you all to know something. I wasn't just a teacher who took Rachel in out of kindness. The truth is, I needed her as much as she needed me." Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at Catherine. "I had lost my own daughter a few years before I met Rachel," she continued writing, tears forming in her eyes. "She died in an accident when she was just 6 years old. I was devastated. I thought about giving up on everything. But then I met Rachel, this brilliant and rejected girl, and I saw a second chance. A chance to be a mother again, to give and receive love again." Rachel dropped what she was doing and ran to hug Catherine. Everyone was crying now, even Michael. "So thank you," Catherine wrote with trembling hands. "Thank you for letting me be your mother, Rachel. Thank you for saving my life as much as I saved yours." It was one of the most emotional moments since the reunion, the understanding that all of them, Elizabeth, Rachel, Catherine, Emma, Michael, had saved each other in different ways. That family wasn't just about blood, but about choice, love, and commitment. The years continued to pass. Rachel's health stabilized completely. The transplanted kidney worked perfectly thanks to rigorous medical follow-up and the healthy lifestyle both sisters had adopted. Elizabeth also fully recovered from the surgery, with no long-term complications. Emma met a young man named Nathan during a foundation event. He was an ASL interpreter and had a genuine passion for inclusion and deaf rights. They started dating, and Rachel immediately approved. She saw in Nathan the same kindness and understanding that Emma's father had shown. Michael and Jennifer, the deaf teacher he had met at the restaurant, also developed a serious relationship. It was through Jennifer that Michael truly understood the daily challenges the deaf community faced. He became an active advocate, using his position and resources to promote change. The Skyline restaurant continued to thrive, but more importantly, it remained a beacon of inclusion and acceptance. Beautiful stories happened there regularly. A father who hadn't spoken to his deaf son for 20 years came to the restaurant after seeing the TV report and reconciled with him there, learning the blue butterfly sign together. A grandmother who was ashamed of her deaf granddaughter brought the whole family for a meal, and for the first time truly tried to communicate through signs. The Blue Butterfly Foundation expanded to other cities. They opened offices in 3 different states, each offering the same support, education, and community services. Rachel traveled occasionally to supervise the new offices, always accompanied by Elizabeth or Emma. It was during one of these trips that something unexpected happened. They were in Boston for the inauguration of a new foundation center when an elderly woman approached. She must have been about 80 years old with completely white hair, moving with difficulty but with determination. "Rachel," the woman said, her voice trembling. "Rachel Wilson?" Rachel, who was talking with Elizabeth through signs, turned around. She didn't recognize the woman immediately, but there was something familiar in her eyes. The woman began to cry. "I'm your mother," she said, "your biological mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Elizabeth felt instant anger rise in her throat. This was the woman who had rejected Rachel, who had allowed them to be separated, who had turned her back on her own daughter. But then she looked at Rachel. Her sister was pale in shock, but there was something in her expression that wasn't anger. It was curiosity, perhaps even compassion. "What do you want?" Elizabeth asked coldly, placing herself protectively between the woman and Rachel. "I just wanted to apologize," the woman said, tears falling freely now. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I'm a monster for what I did. But I need her to know that I never stopped thinking about her, that I regretted it every day of my life." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Rachel signed to Elizabeth, asking her to translate for the woman. "She wants to know why," Elizabeth said, her voice still harsh. "Why did you reject her?" The woman sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "I was afraid," she admitted, "afraid of what it would mean to have a deaf daughter, afraid of what people would say, afraid I wouldn't be good enough to raise her. My husband, your father, was worse. He refused to accept that he had an imperfect daughter, as he put it, and I, cowardly, supported him." "You weren't good enough indeed," Elizabeth spat. "A good mother would have fought for her daughter. A good mother would have chosen the child over pride." "I know," the woman nodded, accepting the reproach. "I failed. I failed terribly, and I paid the price. I lost both daughters. You hated me so much that you cut all ties as soon as you could. Rachel was taken away by my own decision. I spent the last 40 years alone, with only my regret as company." Rachel made more signs, and Elizabeth reluctantly translated. "She wants to know if you tried to find her afterward." "I tried," the woman replied. "When your father died 10 years ago, I tried to look for Rachel, but she had disappeared from the system. No one knew where she was. I kept searching. When I saw the report on TV about you, I thought I was dreaming. To see my two daughters together, happy, successful. It was beautiful and painful at the same time. Painful because I wasn't part of it, because I threw away my chance." "You're right," Elizabeth said harshly. "You're not part of this, and you never will be. You lost that right 40 years ago." Rachel touched Elizabeth's arm, asking her to wait. Then, for the first time since the woman had appeared, she approached. She stopped in front of her birth mother and studied her for a long moment. Then she made a single sign, the sign for Y in standard ASL. A simple sign, but loaded with decades of pain. The woman understood the question without needing a translation. "Why now?" she interpreted. "Because I couldn't bear to live without trying any longer, because I needed to look into your eyes and say how sorry I am. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that it was my failure, not yours. You were never the problem, I was." Rachel stood still for another moment. Then she made another sign, a sign that surprised Elizabeth. It was the sign for "thank you." "Thank you," the mother repeated, confused. "Why?" Rachel began to sign, and Elizabeth, still reluctant but respecting her sister's wish, translated. "She says, 'Thank you for finally telling the truth. Thank you for acknowledging that the mistake was yours, not hers.' For years she internalized the rejection, believing there was something wrong with her. Hearing you admit it was your failure, not hers, has some value." The woman was sobbing now. "But," Elizabeth continued, translating, "this doesn't mean forgiveness, it doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means she can have some peace, knowing you acknowledge what you did." Rachel made more signs. "She wants you to know that she had a good life, that Catherine truly loved her, that she found her sister again, that she has a wonderful daughter, that she is happy, and that this happiness does not include you." It was harsh but necessary. The woman nodded, accepting. "I understand," she said, "and I am grateful for that. Grateful that she found love, even without me, even in spite of me." Rachel made one last sign before turning away. It was the sign for blue butterfly. The woman didn't know what it meant, but she saw the beauty of the movement. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means transformation," Elizabeth explained. "It means something beautiful can emerge even from the deepest pain. My sister transformed. She survived rejection and became a force for good. You have no part in that transformation, but perhaps you can learn from it." And then Elizabeth led Rachel away, leaving the birth mother behind. They did not look back. Later that night at the hotel, Elizabeth asked Rachel if she was okay. "You didn't have to be so kind to her," Elizabeth said. "She didn't even deserve your attention." Rachel smiled sadly and signed. "She is pathetic and broken. Carrying anger for her would be giving her power over me. I choose peace. I choose to move forward. She can live with her regret. I will live with my love." Elizabeth hugged her sister, amazed once again by her strength. Back in Chicago, life resumed its pace. The encounter with the birth mother was processed in therapy, discussed as a family, and then filed away as a closed chapter. There were more important things to focus on. Emma and Nathan got engaged. The proposal happened at the Skyline restaurant, at the same table where it all began, table 7. Nathan had learned the secret signs from Emma and used them to ask for her hand. It was beautiful and moving, with half the restaurant watching and applauding. The wedding was planned to be a grand celebration. Emma insisted it be completely bilingual, with celebrants speaking and signing simultaneously. Rachel helped design the invitations and decorations, incorporating visual elements that made sense for both hearing and deaf people. Catherine was in frail health at that point, but she was determined to be present. Elizabeth made sure everything was arranged for her comfort, including a special chair and a nurse on standby, just as a precaution. The wedding day was perfect. Emma looked beautiful in a dress she had helped design herself, with embroidery inspired by blue butterflies. Rachel was the matron of honor, with Elizabeth by her side. Michael walked the bride down the aisle, since Emma's father had passed away years before. During the ceremony, when Emma and Nathan exchanged vows, both spoken and signed, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. They promised unconditional love, open communication, and total acceptance. They promised to create a family where everyone was welcome, no matter how they expressed themselves. At the reception, which took place at the Skyline restaurant, Rachel gave an emotional speech. "Emma," she signed with her daughter translating for the hearing guests, "you are my greatest gift, my greatest joy. You grew up kind and strong, compassionate and determined. You take what life gives you and turn it into something beautiful, exactly like a blue butterfly." Elizabeth also spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. 5 years ago, I didn't know I had a niece. I didn't know my sister was alive. My life had a hole the size of Rachel. But then, through fate or luck or maybe just stubborn love, we found each other again. And I didn't just get my sister back. I gained Emma. I gained Catherine. I gained a family I thought I had lost forever. The party was joyful and full of love. There was music and dancing, with the DJ also playing visual songs that deaf people could feel through vibrations. There was delicious food prepared by the restaurant staff. And above all, there was connection. Deaf and hearing people mingled, communicating through signs and speech, finding ways to connect that went beyond words. Late at night, Elizabeth found Rachel sitting alone for a moment on the restaurant's balcony. "Are you okay?" she asked through the signs she now completely mastered. Rachel nodded and made the sign for happy. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, about everything we've survived, and how it was all worth it to get here." "It really was," Elizabeth agreed, sitting beside her sister. "Every tear, every year of separation, every moment of pain. It all led to this moment." They sat in silence for a moment, just enjoying the starry night and the sounds of the party inside. "You know what amazes me the most?" Rachel signed eventually. "It's that it wasn't just about us. Our story touched so many other people, changed lives, saved families. The pain we went through turned into hope for others." "Like blue butterflies," Elizabeth replied with a smile. "Exactly like blue butterflies." The following years were ones of growth and consolidation. The Blue Butterfly Foundation expanded even further, now present in 10 U.S. states. Each center had its own dedicated team, but all operated with the same core principles: love, acceptance, and communication. The Skyline restaurant became an institution in Chicago. Articles in international magazines highlighted it as a model of inclusive business. Business schools studied its case as an example of corporate social responsibility. But for Elizabeth and Rachel, the greatest success was the personal stories. Like the 8-year-old boy who ate at their restaurant and decided to learn ASL to communicate with his deaf cousin, or the grandmother who, inspired by their story, finally accepted the deaf granddaughter she had rejected at birth. Catherine passed away peacefully at 82, with Rachel, Elizabeth, and Emma by her side. Her last written words were, "Thank you for letting me be part of something so beautiful. Thank you for giving me a family again." The funeral was a celebration of her extraordinary life. Hundreds of people attended, many of them former students she had helped over decades as a teacher. Rachel cried, but they were tears of gratitude as much as sadness. Catherine had given her everything when the world had offered her nothing. She had been a mother, a friend, a mentor, and a savior. It was Emma who suggested creating a scholarship in Catherine's name. The Catherine Wilson Scholarship would be awarded annually to a deaf student who demonstrated a passion for education and helping others. The first recipient was a young woman named Olivia, who dreamed of becoming an ASL teacher. Elizabeth and Rachel dealt with their grief together, finding comfort in each other. They had lost Catherine, but her essence would live on through the foundation, the restaurant, every life they had touched together. Michael eventually married Jennifer, and the couple had a daughter they named Catherine, in honor of the great-grandmother they would never know but whose legacy they would carry. Little Catherine was born hearing, but from the cradle she was exposed to both speech and signs. Before the age of 2, she was already fluent in both languages. Seeing her great-granddaughter signing filled Rachel with indescribable joy. It was like watching the circle complete itself. The language that had been her means of survival was now celebrated, learned, and valued. Emma and Nathan also had children, twins they named Ethan and Sophia. Ethan was born deaf, like his grandmother. Instead of mourning, he was welcomed with joy. Emma and Nathan were already prepared. They had all the necessary resources and knowledge. Ethan would grow up loved, accepted, with all the tools to thrive. It was during a family gathering on the 10th anniversary of Elizabeth and Rachel's reunion that Michael made a special toast. 10 years ago, my mother met a customer in her restaurant, he said, with Jennifer translating into ASL beside him. That chance encounter changed everything. It gave us an extended family. It taught us about true love, about forgiveness, about never giving up. Today, I look around this table and see aunts, cousins, grandparents who weren't in my life 10 years ago. I see a sister I didn't know. I see a daughter who communicates in 2 languages thanks to this family. And I am grateful. Grateful for my mother's persistence, for Aunt Rachel's strength, for Grandma Catherine's wisdom, for Emma's courage. All of you turned a story of pain into a story of hope. Everyone raised their glasses. Rachel, with tears in her eyes, made the blue butterfly sign. One by one, everyone around the table repeated the sign. 3 generations, connected by love and language, celebrating not just survival, but triumph. Elizabeth looked at her sister and saw not the rejected child from 45 years ago, but the strong and resilient woman she had become. She saw the talented designer, the dedicated mother, the loving grandmother, the passionate activist. She saw everything Rachel had achieved despite and perhaps because of the adversities. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel sighed, noticing her sister's gaze. "I'm thinking that I kept my promise," Elizabeth replied. "I said I would protect you. It took 40 years, but I finally did." "You always protected me," Rachel corrected. "Even when you were far away. Your love protected me. Knowing you were out there, looking for me, gave me strength to carry on the hardest days." "We saved each other," Elizabeth concluded. "Yes," Rachel agreed, smiling. "We did." The Skyline restaurant continued to evolve. Elizabeth, now in her 60s, began passing more responsibilities to Michael and Emma. She wanted more time to travel with Rachel, to work at the foundation, to simply enjoy the company of the sister she had almost lost. Rachel, also aging but with stable health, thanks to the successful transplant and ongoing medical care, also reduced her work hours. She spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them the secret signs that were once almost forgotten. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of the house they now fully shared, Rachel took an old notebook from a drawer. It was the same notebook where she used to draw blue butterflies as a child. It was yellowed and fragile, but the pages still showed the careful drawings of a girl who found beauty even in suffering. "I've kept this all these years," she signed, "as a reminder of who I was, of where I came from." Elizabeth turned the pages gently. On each one, blue butterflies in different stages, some still cocoons, others emerging, others flying freely. "It's a perfect metaphor," Elizabeth observed, "of you, of us, of our journey." I want Ethan to have this, Rachel signed, when he's older. I want him to know that his grandmother understands what he might face, that she went through it and survived, that he will also survive and thrive. He'll do more than survive, Elizabeth assured. He'll fly, because he has you, he has Emma, he has this whole family who will fight for him every day. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes, as always happened when they spoke of their grandson. You know what moves me the most, she signed. It's that Ethan will never know the rejection I knew. He'll grow up knowing he's perfect exactly as he is. He'll have every opportunity, all the love, all the support. It's the perfect revenge against those who tried to break us, not revenge through anger, but through love, through creating a better world. The best revenge is living well, Elizabeth agreed, and you've lived wonderfully well. The years kept passing, bringing inevitable changes. Elizabeth officially retired from the restaurant at 68, completely passing the reins to Michael and Emma. The business was in good hands. Rachel also retired but continued as a consultant for the foundation. They spent their days together, often in the company of their grandchildren. They taught the children the secret signs, told stories from the past, created new memories to make up for the lost decades. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Elizabeth received a call from Dr. Brown, the doctor who had performed the transplant years ago. Mrs. Taylor, I'm calling to update you about some interesting research, he said. We're studying cases of successful long-term transplants. Your and Rachel's case is extraordinary. 15 years later, the kidney is still functioning perfectly. We'd like to include you in a study that could help other patients. Would you be interested? Elizabeth agreed immediately. If their story could help anyone else, she'd be happy to participate. The study led to a medical paper that was published in a renowned journal. The case of the Taylor-Wilson sisters became an example of successful transplantation studied in medical schools. But more important than the science was the human story behind it. It was about love that spans decades, about never giving up, about sacrificing for those we love. When Elizabeth turned 70, Rachel organized a surprise party at the Skyline restaurant. It was full of friends, family, current and former employees, loyal customers, members of the deaf community, foundation beneficiaries. It was a celebration not just of a birthday, but of a life well lived. During the party, Rachel asked for everyone's attention. With Emma translating, she gave a speech that left everyone in tears. Elizabeth, she signed, when I was a little girl being taken away from home, you ran after the car shouting that you would come back for me. You were only 8 years old. You had no power to keep that promise, but you kept that promise in your heart for 40 years. And when we finally reunited, you literally gave me part of yourself to save me. There are no words, in ASL or in English, that can adequately express my gratitude, my love, my admiration. You are the bravest, most loving, most dedicated sister anyone could have, and I'm grateful every day to have you in my life. Happy birthday, my blue butterfly, my sister, my heroine, Elizabeth cried openly. Then she stood up and hugged Rachel, and for long minutes they just stayed like that, two sisters who had survived the impossible and emerged stronger. You know what I realized, Elizabeth said later, making the signs as she spoke so everyone could understand. Our lives could have been defined by rejection, by pain, by separation, but we chose differently. We chose to let love define our story. And in doing so, we changed not only our own lives, but the lives of so many others. Every family we helped through the foundation, every customer who learns sign language at the restaurant, every child who grows up knowing they are perfect as they are. That is our true legacy. Not the money or the business, but the love we spread. The party lasted until late hours. There was music, dancing, wonderful food, and countless moments of joy. Ethan, now 5 years old, gave a sign language performance that delighted everyone. Little Catherine, Michael's granddaughter, recited a poem about blue butterflies that her teacher had helped write. When everyone had finally left and only the closest family remained, they gathered at table 7, the table where it all began. Do you remember that day? Emma asked. When I made signs with Grandma Catherine and you froze, Aunt Elizabeth. How could I forget? Elizabeth replied. It was the day that changed everything. It wasn't chance, Rachel signed. Grandma Catherine had planned everything carefully. She knew I needed urgent help but didn't want to just appear out of nowhere. So she researched you, found out about the restaurant, and sent Emma to work here. She knew sooner or later Emma would use the special signs, and you would recognize them. Why did she do it that way? Michael asked. Why not just show up and explain? Because she was afraid, Rachel explained. Afraid that after 40 years, Elizabeth might reject her. Afraid of causing more pain. She wanted it to happen naturally, for the signs to connect us organically as they were always meant to do. That was clever of her, Elizabeth admitted. If she had just shown up saying, "Your sister is sick and needs a kidney," I would have been suspicious. But seeing the secret signs, recognizing that connection, and there was no way to doubt. Grandma Catherine was wise, Emma said affectionately. She knew some things need to happen at the right time, in the right way. They talked through the night, reminiscing, sharing stories, laughing and crying. It was in these moments that Elizabeth felt most grateful, for having her sister back, for having an expanded family that loved unconditionally, for having lived long enough to see pain turn into joy. End of story. And now, dear listener, what did you think of this story? Do you believe Elizabeth made the right decision to donate her kidney without hesitation? Would you have the same courage? Tell us your opinion in the comments with sincere words. Share if you've been through something similar, if you've reunited with someone important after years apart. Your story may inspire others. Thank you so much for joining us this far. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one. Until next time.